hear from our soon-to-be retired beloved Deacon Greg Smith. We're going to do this Charleston Literary Festival style with me as the interlocutor. But before we begin with a prayer, I want to offer a couple of notes. December is a really busy month, and it's sort of kind of a short month because Advent 4 and Christmas Eve are on the very same day on the calendar this year. And we've got celebration for Greg on December the 3rd and a potluck on the 10th and lessons and carols on the 17th. So we are going to take December off for a Sunday evening event, but I am happy to say that on January the 14th at 5 p.m. We will have Bob Stockton, who is a professor at the College of Charleston, and a friend and acquaintance, former member of this congregation, and he will be lecturing on the architecture, which is something we've not spent much time on. He'll be lecturing on the architecture of St. Stephen's, this building. So that will be January the 14th at 5 p.m. And with that, let's begin with a prayer. The Lord be with you. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks and praise for the gift of this day, and we thank you especially this night for the gift of your servant Greg. We thank you for his many years of ministry in our diocese and in this congregation. We thank you for his faithfulness, for his love, for his wonderful pastoral ability that touches our hearts. And we ask that you bless us this evening as we reflect on his ministry, and bless him and Lynn and his family now and always. And we ask this for love's sake. Amen. And following this, Vicki Anthos has prepared a wonderful reception in Stevens Hall. Hope you can join us for that. So, Greg, you have been ordained for 24 years, all in this diocese. I wonder if, to get us started, you could begin by talking about your call to ministry. What made you want to be ordained in the first place?
Well, let me, if I can, just for 1 minute, thank everybody for coming. I appreciate you thinking about me. I'm honored. And I envision that hopefully this is a little better than like when you go to a cocktail party and you got to spend an hour listening to people talk about themselves. We can elevate it a little bit above that. But appreciate you being here. Well, you know, me like all of you, we in our lives we're called to do things. We're called to be part of a board or participate in a particular organization, called to do something. And we do those things, you know, for a year or two or whatever it is, and then we move on. But call to ordination is different because it is something that we're not necessarily thinking about doing. It starts inside of us, and while at least I didn't understand it at the time, God was calling me. I wasn't going to him, he was coming to me. And that's the way any call to ordination maybe should begin. Now, my call, every call is different. But my call took many, many years, and I had to go through a lot of different situations in my life in order to get where I am today, 24 years at the end of this. But so maybe I can briefly describe that and get a feel for the question. I was initially, beginning of the call, I was probably about 35, I forget time, 36, somewhere in there, years old. And it wasn't until 20 years later that I was ordained. So there's 20 years there that things happened in my life. And what I discovered was, in looking back, I mean, you, quite frankly, the last week I had to think about this a little bit, and it helped me. And one of the things that came to me was I had to go through some life situations. I had to go through some experiences in order to prepare my heart for what I was about to undertake. And if I had not gone through that, there was no way that I could have gotten through what I have gone through for 20 years, which we'll spend some time talking about. But interestingly enough, my call was a call to servanthood. But more deeply than that, it was a call to serve people that were in need. And if you go a little deeper than that, the call really is to see the mystery that comes out of suffering. And I cannot tell you how fortunate I have been to be able to walk that journey. And we can talk about some things, hopefully, as we go along about what happened. But before I could understand that, I had to suffer. And because my life, up until then, first 35 years of my life, roughly, was pretty pristine. And I didn't know about hardship. I knew about trying hard. I knew about adversity. You learn that through all kinds of things. From the playground to family ventures to whatever. Working in school, but true hardship. And it began with my wife getting ill. And it was a devastating part of our life. And at that time, I was working for a large corporation and had responsibilities in marketing and business development. We spent a lot of time on airplanes and staffs of people and business plans and things that were interesting. I was fortunate to do it. But until I suffered, I only knew that world. I only knew the world of relative success and prosperity and striving and getting better and making money and things that are not bad in themselves. But that's all I knew. So I was suddenly woken up through the experience. And I just started to realize some things. One was I had forgotten who I was, because as a young boy, I can't explain it, but I had a sense of God. I learned it, I've told a few stories. I learned it through nature, creation. That's how I first learned it, sensed it. And I had a sense of always wanted to be with people who people didn't want to be with necessarily. And just my heart took me to other people. But as I grew older, graduated from high school and college and business, I'd forgotten all of that. And so the first thing that happened was the re-remembering of who I was and trying to think, what happened to that guy? And then through lots of my busy life, when I last left the my corporate work, I was responsible for sales and marketing for a furniture manufacturing company. And they hired me away from a large corporation because they had never been able to really grow their business. And I talked to them, and I could see all kinds of possibilities. And I said, I think I could really help these people. I think it'd be a really neat thing to do. And we could live in a really neat place to raise our family. There were lots of good things about it. And I worked there. And through all the time there, which was very gratifying. I mean, we tripled the size of the business. We had to build a new factory, buy all kinds of equipment and trucks to keep up. I just kept feeling this feeling of unsettling, kind of dis-ease within myself. And I now know that that was the beginning of my call. So I began to explore this, and I got very involved in, we were somewhat involved in the church, but I started getting involved in the church. I remember one time listening to a sermon about Matthew 25, I was naked and you clothed me, I was thirsty and you gave me something to, what you do to the least of these, you do unto me. Being very affected by that, because it was touching me of who I was. The people that people don't pay attention to who Jesus is talking about there. And I remember thinking, you know what, I got a long ways to go. I don't even know a poor person. And so I began a venture just a journey of trying to do something about that. And I became involved in a homeless shelter, and we started to build some habitat homes and feeding programs, just things as a layperson that I could start to understand this. So as I moved along, the priests that I would talk to encouraged me to think about ordination. And then things, then it made this change of what I was talking about. This was now different. You don't do this for a year. This is a lifelong call, a commitment. It changes everything. The way you think of yourself, your relationship with God, relationship with other people. It just, everything is different. And so I then began the process of ordination. Maybe I can briefly describe that, and we can think about the questions you want to ask. We might be a little more pertinent, but it was. I'll take it up to the time I went to the church with my call. My time within the parish was one of a long process of reading, praying, talking to people, writing, and trying to understand this. And what I began to understand is suffering opens us up to God. Suffering makes us vulnerable, which makes us childlike. Suffering opens up relationships with other people. there is, in the goodness and mercy of God, we know this. Suffering will never be eliminated from our life. That's part of the human condition. But God is always with us in our suffering, in our losses. And the promise is, out of the loss, always something good will happen. We just have to faithfully continue on the journey to find out what that's going to be. So let me stop there.
Okay. It's interesting when you talked, Greg, about the priest in your parish, which was Grace. Is that right? That's your sponsoring parish?
Right.
That the priest in your parish was the first person to ask you if you had considered ordination. And I think it's so powerful to have somebody see that in you. That certainly was the same with me. It wasn't until somebody sitting down with me asked me the question that I first considered the possibility of ordination, because it's not something that a kid grows up thinking that they're going to do. But I wonder, before we move into the process itself, did the priest at your parish say, "I see a deacon in you," or how did you make the decision? Because there's discernment for the diaconate, discernment for priesthood.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, very, very astute, because it's a different call. A deacon is called to serve all people, especially the poor, the bereaved, the lonely, people that are sick. And when that conversation first started, it was a call to priesthood. And I, quite frankly, didn't, I was trying to understand priesthood, diaconate. That was a lot of the readings. I was trying to make some sense out of it. So it's much easier for me to understand now, but at that time it wasn't that clear. And so I thought, okay, I'm being called to be, I'm going to talk about being a priest. Well, two things happened. And I think this is part of just being open and vulnerable to this process of. One is my late wife, Mary Ann. For 30 years, she suffered from depression. And where this, which revolves around the suffering that I talked about initially, she then was drawn into her new understanding of suffering. And she grew spiritually in amazing ways over the years as she went through her tough journey. In a brave and loving and way, continued to be a wonderful wife and best mother I've ever seen. And she voiced concerns that, was she well enough to be, quote, the wife of a priest? Because there's some pressure there that she probably didn't need. And so Donald and Marianne and I spent a lot of time talking about that, and Donald's a very wise man. I was very
This
fortunate.
is Donald McPhail.
Donald McPhail, yeah. Who was the rector at Grace Church downtown on Wentworth Street. And as a layperson, that's where I went to church. He said, well, maybe, just for practical purposes, you should maybe think about the diaconate. And so we started to spend some time there. But what I discovered was, if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have been called into the ministry that I was that God wanted me to be in. Before you become a priest, you're a deacon.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody becomes a deacon. But a vocational deacon is you stay a deacon, and then you spend your life seeing people in hospitals. And for me, seeing people within the church, pastoral care ways, just as a few examples. Now, I should say, just because it was a big part of this for me, when I left my corporate work, I felt I was called into service ministry. But the one little logistical problem was you don't get paid being a deacon. Mm-hmm. You have to figure out how to earn a living. And so I said, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to assist in liturgy, work within the church, doing all the things you have to do, but I'm going to fully live out my vocation. So I did two things that allowed me to do that. I ran a local homeless shelter, and then I became a hospital chaplain after that, and I retired as managing the pastoral care program. Let's see, where's Lynn? How long ago? 12, 13 years ago? 12 years ago. I retired 12 years ago as the manager of pastoral care for Roper. So I was very fortunate, and I didn't think that was so unique at the time, but I think it's pretty unique that people can have a vocation, a diaconate vocation, and also become the deacon in a church. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think Donald, to answer the question, Donald picked up on that, and he saw a practical reason to, because, I was a husband, but I had to bring that ministry, Donald and I also had to bring that ministry of presence to Marianne. She couldn't be excluded from this. She was part of it. And quite frankly, maybe the biggest part of it.
Well, that's a reminder, too, that one's call, whether it's to ordination or to any call that any of us might be called to, it's not just about us, right? It's about our families. It's about, how the call impacts not just us, but the people that we are closest to. You certainly have to take that into consideration.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Well, to go through an ordination process, and I talked about this in a Sunday Adult Ed recently, can be unique diocese to diocese, because you start your discernment in a congregation, but ultimately, in order to move forward in the process, you have to move forward through a particular diocese. And we've talked about this some when you were going through the ordination process 25, 26 years ago. This diocese was in a very unique place, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the landscape was of the Diocese of South Carolina at the time, and what your experience was going through the ordination process of this diocese.
Okay, so I started the ordination process, which begins with meeting with your priest. Priest recommends to the vestry, that you could go in, at least explore this process. The vestry votes on it. And then you go before the commission of ministry within the diocese. And if they approve you, the standing committee approves you, and then eventually the bishop. So I began that process roughly 1995. The Diocese of South Carolina, and these are kind of my thoughts. I don't know. I think I'm pretty accurate what I'm going to say, but it was a kind of a mainstream diocese, in the 50s, 60s, part of the 70s, maybe to the conservative side in terms of theology. Pretty mainline, conservative. But in the 80s, there was beginning a movement within this diocese to just have, quote, conservative clergy, theologically conservative clergy. And there was a process set up where only conservative clergy would be brought in. And because of that evolution of leadership, it started to become a lot of like-minded people coming in. And the idea of having a big tent with diversity, which is part of our tradition, Episcopal tradition, started to go away. So by 1995, there were a lot of fine clergy who left this diocese. And some pretty hardcore thinkers were pretty well sitting in this place. So and I didn't meet any of that with obviously my priest, my vestry. But when I got to the Commission on Ministry, they didn't want to know what my theological thoughts were on suffering. They wanted to know how I felt about gays, is the way they would say it. They wanted to know what I felt about women being ordained. They had most of the questions about my moralistic thinking. What would I do if I knew that two people had had sex before marriage, rather than talking about their relationship? So, in between those questions, and this was not like a afternoon meeting, there was 2 meetings, which were several hours long, which I applaud the Episcopal Church for doing. They take this seriously. But because of the dynamics of the diocese, that they wanted to make sure that someone like me wasn't getting in. So I remember and I was pretty sure, and Donald was pretty sure, that Donald McPhail, that I wasn't going to make it. I mean, he was kind of like pepping me up a little bit, saying, I think you can do it. This was like the second meeting, waiting for the vote. And so what happened was this. The man who told me, thumbs up or thumbs down, said, Greg, I'm just thankful that I don't have to make a decision on you being ordained as a priest in this diocese, because I would say no. But if I was in a hospital and someone was coming and visit me, I'd be glad it's you. So I'm going to vote yes. So it was a guarded way of saying it's okay. So what that did is it allowed you to, then go on. But just to give you a feel of, prior to that, there was many things you had to do before you even got to that group. One, which was good, you had to go through psychiatric examinations. And the psychiatrist that examined me, tested me, and then counseled with me on two, I can't remember how long the visits were, but 2-hour visits, something like that. He didn't spend a lot of time talking about, things other than why homosexuality was a mental disorder. And gave me a book. He said, "This is required reading." It was a big, thick book. And when I got, he said, when I got home, I opened the book, and it was about that. It's the only book I ever threw away. I'd never throw a book away. Every book has something legitimate. But it was so disgusting to me that I just didn't want to touch it. I just threw it out, went outside at the trash can and threw it away. So there was a lot of dealing with that sort of thing. And then, after I became ordained, it was still living within that environment for between the year, from 1999 until roughly, bad dates, Bishop von Rosenberg came in here, I think in 2016. If that was the year, that was the first time I felt, because I knew what the Episcopal Church was like outside of this diocese. It's the first time I felt, I'm finally in the Episcopal Church.
This was a long time.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Well, speaking about your ordained ministry after ordination, how many parishes were you assigned to? And that is something to note for deacons, that they are assigned, unlike priests that are a little bit more like free agents in the way they move around. How many congregations were you assigned to, and what are some ministry experiences that stand out to you over the 24 years of your diaconate?
Yeah. Well, I've served in 4 different parishes. I'll list them off, and then maybe we can go back and talk about some of them. But I started out at St. Peter's Church, which is right across from Charlestown Landing, which is now the Church of the Good Shepherd. And then I went to Old St. Andrews, which is out on Highway 60, on kind of the way to the plantations, old historic church. And then I came to St. Stephen's. That was in 2007. And then I left St. Stephen's and was at St. Francis for 4 years. And St. Francis was a group of people that were not able to go back to their church, Old St. Andrews, when St. Andrews left the Episcopal Church. And St. Francis was established to have a place for those people to worship. And then I came back to St. Stephen's in 2000, when, Lynn?
18 sounds right.
18, I think that's right, yeah. Now, maybe it's helpful. It is for me as I think about this, because it makes me understand this, things we've been talking about a little better. 2 out of the 4 churches that I've served at left the Episcopal Church. And I reflect back of what my experience was within those 2 churches. I've always been the same person I am now as I was then, either at St. Peter's or Old St. Andrews. I gave the same type sermon. I gave the same presence with pastoral care. Any Christian education program that I was asked to do in the same way. I always felt that I was received the same way there that I was here, in a loving manner. And there were never differences or debates, or people seemed to, resonate with what I was saying, which was pretty simple. God loves you. And there's a hard way of reconciling. Why would those people in that parish want to leave the Episcopal Church when they receive the gospel messages in the same way? And I think we're all, we all yearn to come to church and listen and hear the message and believe it and buy into it. And when the leadership of the church changes and starts preaching something else, I think that some of it, we have to always listen, just like we do anything, with open ears. The other thing is, and I really believe this, it wasn't the people in the pews that left. The people who left were the people who led them out. And because I saw a huge difference between the views of the people in the parish. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't have a conservative view. That's legitimate. I mean, we need each other to hear. I need a conservative view of theology to remind me of things that I forget about, because I get too self-focused. I'm not saying that. That's really good. But when you're leading your people out and it's based on ego and ideology and some other things, it kind of leads us to a bad place. And I felt, this is my feelings. I have, quite frankly, had nobody ever say that they agree with me on this. That's where the break occurred. And it was because of what happened beginning in the 80s. If you bring clergy leadership in, that wasn't healthy. And what makes things healthy is diversity. Always, I talked about, if I find God in nature. Well, nature is only healthy when it's diverse. And it's the same thing going on in our souls. We're only healthy when we can have some diversity. So, and I think that's one thing that we all have to worry about. We got to get a little more diverse. We think we're a diverse church, but I think we got to move on a little bit to some more diversity and different types of diversity. We can talk about that later.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's a great segue because you've served this congregation more years than any other congregation in your ordained life. You've served St. Stephen's approximately half of your ordained life, 12 years, over 2 different terms, as you said. Could you reflect on things that stand out to you in your years here?
Well, I marvel at this church. You think, I'm going to talk maybe 2 levels. I'm going to talk things that happen to me personally, and then I want to just view maybe what I've seen happen. Let me start with things that I've seen happen. The newfound discovery, thanks to Adam, of our identity, of who we are, bringing attention to how we began and how that identity can be carried through. That it used to be that most of the people in the pews were black, African Americans. And the love of church, the love of community that we all like, that's where it started. And we've been able to continue to honor that tradition. People like to come here because it's friendly and it's heartwarming. Where did that start? It started within the black community. And we've been able to hold on to it, and Adam's educated us on that. And before Adam came, you didn't see kids here. We were kind of afraid of children. We didn't know how to handle them. We even took down the playground one year. It was not a place for children. I mean, that was kind of like expressed, sometimes openly expressed. And like any church, you go through your normal attrition of, 10% of a year, whatever it is. People kind of go away or, whatever. Well, this church in the last 10 years has done that plus, because we had so many long-standing healthy members that lasted a long time, and suddenly we've had a lot of loss. Think about all the people just 5 years ago who would be sitting here tonight that are not with us. And without the children bringing their parents in here through the programs that we would be a different church. We're vibrant now because we've been, people that have gone have been replaced by new people coming in. The heart of the original, let's say, 1980 black parish, to allow gay people to come in, is part of our identity. And it can be cherished. Most people are afraid to do that. Most churches are afraid to do that. And we know how to do it because we've done it. And we can see what happened to this place. The gay community in this church has added so much to community and the worship experience, and understanding of people coming together. So I'm sure that they're out there, but I just don't know where they are right now. The church has been able to do just those 3 things in a fairly short period of time. And that's what should be cherished about this place, along with others. I mean, we got this incredible music program, and we actually have a good preacher, But we just got to be aware of that, and so that is incredible in my thinking, and I feel so fortunate to have been able to spend half of my ministry within a church like that. I'd like to say with all I went through before that I deserve it, but kidding.
Well, hearing you say that it really wasn't until 2015, 2016 that you finally felt like you were in a diocese that was part of the Episcopal Church.
Right.
I mean, it meant that the majority of your ministry, you were struggling to navigate ministry within a diocese that in many respects
Right.
was peeling away from the wider Episcopal Church. I wonder today, Greg, given where we are now, having elected, thanks be to God, a wonderful new diocesan bishop. You were recently a part of our delegation to our diocesan convention. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it's like in our diocese today in contrast to what it was like when you began your ministry 24 years ago.
Right. Well, I remember I sat down with the bishop that ordained me, part of the placement process, and he was felt like he was kind of looking down on me and what my view of the world and my theology. And he said, you know what your problem is? He said, your problem is you think you can just love everything to death. And I thought, that's right. That's the best description of the gospel I've ever heard. That we are all called to love each other to death while we're on this earth. And then God takes it the next step, and he says, then I'll even love you after you leave this earth. And so I always, for those years before, I struggled with that kind of a disconnect. And when we'd go to a convention, people would line up at their microphones and they would argue and argue and argue and all this stuff. It was just, everything was that kind of a world. Now, I say that, I guess I am being critical, but that's not where my heart is. It's to explain the environment. And I'll contrast that to what happened a week ago when we went to our most recent convention. The nice thing about that convention was everybody was loving each other to death. People cared about each other. The prayers were beautiful. The fellowship was beautiful. The things that the diocese was doing, programs of reconciliation with black churches, is an example. Thing that the commission that Adam is heading up, the Justice and Racial Reconciliation Committee. The new churches they plan to start. The speakers that they brought in, which were life-giving rather than moralizing. There was a spirit that we all would yearn for, that lives within the clergy in this diocese. It was so healthy that I quite frankly just felt a little bit weepy about it. But along with that feelings of good sadness was this incredible sense of gratitude of what God's hand has been in this place, meaning this diocese, during all these years. And where we started the discussion, out of the suffering, look what's come out of the suffering, the brokenness. It is about as most wonderful spirit of a group in the same room that I could imagine.
I'm so happy that you've had that experience
Right.
After all of your many years of ministry in this diocese. I have one more question, Greg, and then I'd like to ask if folks have questions of Greg. As you prepare to retire, what are your hopes for our parish at St. Stephen's and for the Diocese of South Carolina?
Well, I'm going to quickly start with the diocese, and then I want to spend some time talking about our Bishop, Ruth Woodless Stanley. It is an amazing bishop. And she has got this diocese on a path that is beyond wonderful. The new priests that she's encouraging to come in, her relationships with the churches, with the leadership, with the clergy. Everybody loves this lady. She's intelligent, gifted, spirit-filled. I can't think of a better person to lead us. So we're on the way. I mean, she's got the plan. Everybody's bought into it, and it's off and running. St. Stephen's, let's go back to where we were talking a few minutes ago, our uniqueness and our identity. Is there a place like this that you know of? What can we do with that identity? This is to answer your question. What do you think my hopes and dreams are? Well, I can envision, how or when and all that, I don't know. Just a vision. That the people that have sat in the pews of this place and the clergy leadership has figured out a way to have people that are different come together. Now we are in many ways not different. I get that. But when we think about, we are not afraid to have someone different walk into those doors. We welcome them. And the world we're living in needs a place where people can come and understand that. And I can't think of a better place than that to happen than St. Stephen's. Not that we're perfect at it, or not that we've kind of totally figured out and we know, but we've done it. And so the places that we're different, we can come together and talk about it and pray about it and sing about it and socialize over it. Just the things that we always do, that we're good at. So are we afraid to have people come in and talk about some of the issues that divide us? We had today, the Christian education program. Are we saying that political issues should come into this room, into this sanctuary, and we're going to talk about politics? No. What we're saying is this. We're going to talk about the world and how to live in the world through our faith. And that's not politics. You think about Jesus in the first century church. He was dealing with the issues of the world. And he brought a community together and said, here's how we're going to live our lives within that world. His answer were the Beatitudes. His answer was forgiveness, reconciliation, respecting the dignity of every human being. I don't think that's talking politics. I think that's talking like Jesus did. So I think we have the capability of doing that at St. Stephen's in some way. We are now, to some extent. I mean, we brought people in here and talked about all kinds of things. You know, I mean, it's not like we've never done it. But it can be, it's needed by the community. And we can do it.
Well, we have time for a few questions. Are there questions or comments from folks out there in the pews?
Great. Aaron and I are here because we love you, right? And maybe you all know you were the first person I met inside. I have a question I want to ask you. But first, I want to thank you, not just on behalf of the people at St. Stephen's, which very love you, but all those people at St. Francis, St. Peter's, St. Andrews. You touched so many lives. And thank you for your ministry to me, for being a pastor to me. You shared a history. I'm sure I haven't ever thinking, well, I'm glad we weren't going through the process in 1995. But I say this with all due respect. You have many of this. But your ministry has always been primarily a ministry of presence, being present with people. And your greatest gift to me is your authenticity. I mean, you just reek authenticity. I mean, it was evident when you sat here today. It's evident when you pastored to me, when I've seen you minister to other people. It is such a gift, and it's so transparent, and it makes it so easy for people. I mean, I can understand why the guy that said to you, I don't know if I really want you to be a deacon, but if I was in the hospital, I want you to see me, right? Because it's your authenticity. How, in the midst of all that stuff you just shared with us, have you and do you retain that authentic self? How are you able to ground yourself in that little void that you found that is so evident in your ministry to others?
Well, say from a practical / spiritual sense, it found its roots in the call. If I hadn't taken so long to become ordained, and understand and believe and breathe the wonderful gifts that Jesus has taught us, then I wouldn't have been able to deal with all that. But when you can look at the, when you can look at the person who doesn't agree with you and know that Jesus is there. I just haven't found him yet. It makes a big difference. And so when we looked at the health of this diocese, how it's gotten healthy over the years, I do believe that the people that I've talked about tonight will also become healthier, spiritually healthier, because they're just going through their period of suffering. I didn't understand things the way I do today. Not that I, quote, understand things. I mean, but, what I experienced today, it was much different than 20 years ago. Some people aren't there yet. And I'd like to believe that they're just on their journey.
Anything else? Yep, David?
Thanks for sharing with us. It's
Mm-hmm.
really heartwarming to hear your stories. Just a question: when you did leave your corporate job,
Yeah.
were people surprised? What was the reaction of everybody?
Nobody had it. Nobody understood it. Maybe I didn't either, and so it made it pretty easy. Yeah, it was a big change, and I think that was one of the biggest pressures we all face. Of, it's kind of a trite saying, but I really believe it is, living in this world, but not of that world. And I think we can all do that. And we're not all called to ordained ministry. But everybody in their own way can look at their lives through the lens of Jesus' eyes and not through the lens of the world. And we suddenly free ourselves up to a different and wonderful new life. Breaking away from that and doing that is hard. And I think that's all of our struggle, including mine today. In fact, one of the things that I have reflected on in the last week is I and Lynn, because I had to drag her into it, I've become too busy doing ministry. And I need to get back to some of the things that sustained me through the periods that Michael's talking about, of spending more time being reflective, spending more time slowing down and doing what I just said, seeing the world through the eyes of Jesus, rather than immediately through a political world or through a economic world, or whatever. And the more we get too busy, we're all busy, we can't avoid that, but too busy, we have to make sure we have time in our lives to do that.
Well, there'll be more time to talk with Greg at the reception in Stevens Hall, and we will have more opportunity to celebrate Greg and his ministry at St. Stephen's on the 3rd of December. but carrying on what Father Michael said, you really have been such a gift, not only to St. Stephen's, but to the Diocese of South Carolina during a very conflicted time, and you have blessed so many, not just in this place, but in so many other corners of our diocese, and for that we are all grateful, and I can feel the circle of love here. So could we give our beloved deacon a big round of applause? Thank you for coming.